Hello, I'm Dr. Harry Jackson, and this is Education Matters, a show dedicated to the empowerment, engagement, and exposure of educational issues of concern to you, the parent, regards to education of our children. Today, we have a special episode. We're going to be dedicated, in a sense, to Black excellence. We've got two congressional candidates, both in Virginia and in Maryland. We have with us on the show Mr. Bernie Flowers and Mr. Paul Lott. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So let's go through some quick rounds of introductions here. Mr. Lott, let's talk with you. Can you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my name is Paul Lott. I've been an education activist for about 30 years, former CEO of an ed tech firm. Really got into this race because of kind of the failed policies in education. And I think that in terms of that there are real solutions out there. I am in this race to win it, and I do believe that we can solve a lot of the problems, particularly when it comes to underperforming and Black students.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Flowers. For those of you who don't know, Mr. Bernie Flowers and I actually served together at U.S. Cyber Command. So, Bernie, welcome. It's been a while. All right, quick introduction, sir.
Sir, thank you for having me. Harry, thank you for remembering me. We worked together a long time ago, and we've just, we've always had the same values. But my situation is I'm a longtime military officer, 21 years in the United States Air Force, deployed everywhere. I spent another 13 years in the federal government, seeing a lot of different things that I did not like. And on the 14th of January, I decided I'd had enough, and I'm going to run for Congress. I saw Paul speak a while back ago. And as far as Harry and I are concerned, we have pretty much the same values, and I'm thankful that he asked me to speak on education. We've got, a lot of problems here up in Maryland. We've got this school to prison pipeline. I'd like to stop that and give young Black people a chance, an even playing field. So that's where I am.
Oh, great. All right. So this is going to be a unique episode because we have here a panel of Black excellence in our community in Northern Virginia and in Maryland. So I'm going to share a little bit about my background before. I've been on the board member for Fairfax County Association for the Gifted. I'm on its diversity committee. I'm currently its vice president. I'm the former president of the Thomas Jefferson PTSA. I'm the first Black president of that school's PTSA, number one high school, the last 2 years. And from my experience, from what I've seen in the last decade, now FCAG is a very bipartisan organization. It's nonpartisan, and it focuses on educational issues, particularly in advanced academic education. And what I found interesting, and this is where I'm going to talk about, because one, Black and running as a Republican, we all deal with the question, why are you a Republican? And I just want to kind of frame it for our audience that over my years, when I'm dealing with educational advocacy within Fairfax County, even those are the most far to the left and liberal, it's interesting that when you really take a look at the educational policy, and particularly advanced academic education, in dealing with root cause issues, I find more and more that people have a hard time disagreeing with a Republican viewpoint, though they may not want to admit it. But just for you gentlemen, because we live in the real world, why the Republican Party?
Which one should go first?
Which one was okay?
Go
Paul,
for it.
how about you? You want to go for it?
Well, in my case, Harry. Oh, go ahead, Paul.
No, in my view, I was a staunch Democrat up until about 2008. My big trigger of switching was basically had come down to abortion policy. At that time, I had read a statistic that there were more Black children being aborted in major cities than being born live. So that was a problem. And so the Democrats were supporting a policy that basically limited our numbers significantly and harmed our families. Beyond that, I started to see the Democrat Party as a party of blaming and excuses and no solutions, and looking out across the field in terms of education, et cetera, that there were real world solutions that were being put in place by private institutions, but that the establishment was consistently blocking progress intentionally in order to maintain the Black community in a position where they were dependent on Democrat programs.
Thank you. Bernie.
Harry, my family have been conservatives for a long time. We come from the South, and, why am I a Republican? As a military officer, the military was a meritocracy for me. I could see that the effort that I put in as far as a military officer, as being a military officer, resulted in a successful career for me. And I wanted that for everyone else. And as Paul kind of alluded to, the Democratic Party seems to be the party of the victim. And it goes back to the Lyndon Johnson Great Society programs, taking the man out of the household, and the damage has been done. And now we've got the Black community literally divided against each other, men versus women, and a lot of kids that don't even know their fathers. And to me, that was a social engineering project from people who do not like the Black community. Although, they say this, they give us money, the government has become the father in the household. And to me, that is unacceptable, and that is why I am a Republican.
Well said. I've already made it well known how I became across this journey as a parent within Fairfax County when I saw the pedagogy of CRT creeping into the classroom. Wow. Okay, so let's go on to it. Now we've established that, so we can be invited back to our cookouts now.
All right.
So let's talk about. Yeah, sometimes, right? It's it's a work in progress, right? But it takes people to come forward like ourselves and say, hey, there really is an issue here. These are the issues. This is how it's harming you. This is how it's harming the community, and we need to do something about it. We need to save ourselves. We really do. Let's talk about some of the issues in the African American community. Bernie, I'd like to start with you. What are some of the issues that have happened in Baltimore with the educational system and its societal impact?
Well, to me, we have literally the highest expenditure per student in the nation. We're spending $18,000 per year in the Baltimore City school system per pupil. And with that said, we're not getting a result that is commensurate with the money that we're spending. We've got what we call up here a school to prison pipeline. Young Black boys are going to school. They're graduating from high school as functional illiterates, and without being able to get a job because they can't read and they can't write and they can't do math, then they have no choice but to turn to the crime system. And before you know it, they're part of the criminal system. They spend a few years in jail and they're totally unemployable. That takes away a taxpayer, that takes away a potential father, and it raises our crime level. So with that said, if we could focus on education, make things a little bit more fair, spend a little less money. I'm a big believer in charter schools, private schools, that sort of thing, school choice. And the current establishment doesn't believe in school choice. And I think that is not serving us fairly here in Baltimore. And that has to do with the crime rate. It has to do with the dissolution of the American Black family, the weakening of the Black man. I could go on and on and on. But the issue is that education is where it all starts, and we're not doing a good job with that. We're not spending our money well.
I'd like to pull at that a little more. We talk about the lack of school choice and what's going on in Baltimore. You have Patterson High School. You're talking about per pupil. I believe that Baltimore spends about over $18,000 per student. At Patterson High School, it was released at their graduating high school class, a class of about 498 students, only 12 were at grade reading level. That they have a lot of students that are at the kindergarten, first and second grade reading level.
Yeah.
That is not preparing a student for the workforce, and that is contributing to the school to prison pipeline. And let's talk about and to identify a specific Democratic policy that led to that, which is minimal grade, where they only allow the minimum grade that a teacher can award a student is 50%. And we can also lead into the next layer because this is Education Matters. So they deal with lack of doing away with ability grouping, where they're trying to have students, the smart students teach the younger students. But let's talk about the minimal grade level. When you have that system set up where you have a student that can take pass one or two assignments, they get passed the class, they get socially promoted, and then they graduate from the school. And then we're dealing with course quality. Now let's talk about course quality.
The thing is just terrible. Just terrible, because again, you're putting these kids out there with no tools. And the sad thing is, everybody didn't have to have a PhD like you. There's kids, if you could just teach them how to read, they could go to the community colleges. And let's say a welder with 1 year in, an experienced welder with 1 year in, can make over $100,000 a year. But those schools, the welding programs, the community colleges can't even take these kids because they can't read. So you can't teach a person who's 18 years old and can't read. So again, yeah, I agree with everything you said. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I get excited about this because these are our people, and years from now, they won't be able to support themselves. They won't be able to enjoy the American dream like we have.
Thank you. So this is truly a sincere effort. Oh, go ahead, Paul. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I think that the issue is a bit more systemic than that. I always talk about the 4 pillars of education: standard, lesson plan, curricula, and assessment. Right? State puts out the standard, and the assessment is supposed to reflect the understanding of that material. What happens across the country is, those two bookends are at the state level. In between, we leave it to the local level to create the lesson plans and to deal with the curricula, what's being taught in the classrooms, et cetera, et cetera. There's a misalignment between what is taking place in the classroom as opposed to what should be taking place in the classroom. There's this loud, voice pushing back on standardized testing, but the reason for standardized testing is to have an objective way to measure whether or not the state standards are being met. We have kids that can get better letter grades but can't pass assessments, which means that they're not being taught what they're supposed to be taught in the classroom. And with that disjointing, with that disconnection, you can't traverse that path to show results. I think also a big issue that's part of it is that when it comes to how children learn, the only way to produce a better school is to produce a better student. And the children of college graduates, et cetera, they have the soft skills in terms of how to teach, how to learn. All learning is self-learning. The school is just a facilitator in terms of how people teach themselves to learn. We've forgotten that. We're telling our kids that if they sit in the classroom and go through the material, that's what an education is. The actual education is the process of self-teaching, and all teaching is self-teaching. We don't tell Black kids that. We tell them that they can go into a classroom and they can passively absorb information as long as the school is presenting the information, and that's not true. And I'll give you an example. When I was in college, I came back for Christmas, and I said I was extolling how wonderful my Harvard professors were, and my mother only went to the 8th grade. She said, And I said, what do you mean by that? She goes, well, it's easy to put a bunch of smart kids who are already self-learners in a classroom and get them to perform. It's hard when you have a bunch of kids that don't know how to learn and you put them in the classroom, and there's no amount of teaching that's going to change that. I think that in the Black community, we need to start from step one, and step one is building a better student. There needs to be part of the curricula, an emphasis on teaching kids how to learn and to let them know that they're not going to get the education that the system gives them. They're going to get the education that they take. Education is a personal responsibility. It takes hard work and it takes effort. And in the Black community, we're not being told that. We're being told that if we just stand there and absorb things, it's just going to happen. And when that doesn't take place and these kids are disappointed, they don't focus on school. Kids don't dislike school when they're successful. Kids dislike school when they're constantly failing, and they dislike school to protect their personal self-esteem and to make an excuse for their failures.
Good point.
A very good point.
Paul, if I could add on to that, I believe that the Democratic Party, the liberal wing, has attacked our morals. And that's part of the issue. We have allowed the Democratic Party to take us away from church, which was always a rallying point for the Black community. If you notice, when COVID happened, the first thing they did was attack the church. They said, you can't go to church, but you can go to a strip club. You can go to a sporting event. You can go anywhere you want, but you can't go to church where Black people rally and can talk to their leaders. But again, the whole system has been designed to weaken, in my opinion, the Black family. And once you get those kids thinking that their fathers are not good, their families are not good, that they are not equal and they can't learn, there's no possible way to motivate them to be strong students. So you may have onesies and twosies who excel, but the majority of them will turn their back on school.
When you have a system, there are underlying root causes that are systemic, that are not racial. Part of that is during the Great Migration, when blacks came north, particularly Baltimore, South Chicago, Philadelphia, et cetera, the average education of a migrating black person was 6.9 years. So what we have in the modern world, all of these areas that were the targets of the Great Migration, this is where these students have this is where these families have ended up. So we already started behind the eighth ball with the sixth grade education. And our system was never designed to move people from that low level education that took place pre 1968 to try to bring them up to a certain standard. And then to exacerbate the problem, in terms of talking about the family and how that was undermined, if you look at Baltimore's graduation rates, the blacks graduated about 73%, whites graduated about 72%, some change. And I've looked at the numbers on this, and wherever black students underperform, white students generally do worse. So we have an issue where systemic poverty is creating the conditions that push back against a proper education. In terms of the social piece, social programs were put in place, and these programs were available for both whites and blacks, but disproportionately, blacks took advantage of these programs, predominantly because the government created a system that allowed people to stay poor in place. See, we used to have ghost towns where jobs moved away. And when those jobs moved away, people moved to where the jobs were, right? 90% of blacks lived in the South after Reconstruction. 47% of blacks moved north to cities like Baltimore by 1968. They moved to these cities, and the education issue was never systemically dealt with. And so what people don't realize is from about 1920 to 1972, in terms of our immigration policy, our borders were pretty much closed. And so our borders were closed, and we didn't have a globalist philosophy. The black rise out of poverty was heavily dependent on industrial and manufacturing jobs. When we changed our policies and allowed for globalization, those manufacturing jobs moved from Baltimore, Chicago, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Boston. And this undereducated population that had been clustered together during segregation lost their ability to make an income. All of the cities that are predominantly black were the places where blacks were most lifted out of poverty until the 1970s. Now it's flipped, where our poorest population are at exactly the places that lifted most of us out of poverty. We're at 55% in 1959. We're at 20% now. Now that's a great reduction, but between 1959 and 1968, poverty fell 20% in the black community due to manufacturing jobs. When you have a low educated population and you take out those manual jobs, you have a problem. And that's what's going on. And I think that systemically, we have to look at manufacturing jobs. You talked about trade jobs. We have to look at trade jobs and manufacturing, but not just there. We have to realize something. Those jobs are not likely to return to those parts to these cities. And our government pays people to stay poor in place. I can get a job as a plumber, but as long as my family is receiving subsidies to stay in the same place where they don't need plumbers, I'm going to have poverty. We have to have a policy in place that allows people not just to be trained, but to be relocated to where the jobs are. The black community is clustered into places where jobs will not be returning in significant numbers because there's too high of a bar in low education and high crime. And you don't get manufacturing wanting to move into communities with low education and high crime.
Agreed.
Okay,
100%.
so let's talk about we agree. Thank you, Paul. So we talk about like course quality, the poor quality of education, how it's really has creating the problems. I mean, Bernie, would you like to comment what Paul just said?
Well, I'd like to go back to this whole idea of globalization because, and if you don't mind, I know this is an education program, but it all kind of comes together.
Absolutely.
Back to Lyndon Baines Johnson, which is a bugaboo for me. All the Democrats, specifically Bill Clinton, they basically gave our manufacturing away, and it ate at the fabric of the black community because a lot of black people were, the lower educated workers. And as I said before, well, Harry, My last job was in the Department of Homeland Security. I was privy to Mr. Biden's gutting of the Customs and Border Patrol. So we got 3,000 people coming across the border literally every day. It's up in the millions now since he's taken over our office. And with that said, let's say about 500,000. But the idea is he is constantly, if you don't notice, bringing people in to the lower economic sphere of our country. And those people, be they the Afghans, the folks coming in across the southern border, the Haitians, now we're talking Ukrainians, those jobs are being taken by those folks, and it's affecting the Black community, and it's just making us poorer and poorer and poorer. And it's driving down the ability of our families to support our children. And people are angry, but they don't understand that if they keep voting for the Democratic establishment, they're going to get more of the same. And there's some sort of thought process where the Republicans get to be the bad old guys. Well, I just believe in things being a meritocracy. I grew up in a place where I grew up in the poorest county in the entire state of North Carolina. It still is. And people made their money from manufacturing. And we didn't all have to be PhDs, master's degree, whatever, but our country made sure jobs were available for us. And now those jobs that you can get right out of high school are not available for us. And we're, as Black families, at the low end of the totem pole. So like you were alluding to, like Paul was alluding to, people don't want to move with the jobs. And how we met, you and I, Harry, was when I was in Texas and I had retired from the United States military. The jobs were at Fort Meade. So I moved my family. A lot of people don't have that kind of wherewithal or the thoughts, but that's what I did. You have to move to where the job is. And if you don't do that, you're going to make yourself poor.
Thank you. All right. Paul, Bernie, we talked about the problem. We talked about how a lot of the problems since the Civil Rights Act, because everyone loves to remember the Civil Rights Act, when Lyndon Johnson, with his famous quote, he'll have us voting for him. Exactly. He said, I'll have them. Exactly. Voting for me for the next 200 years. And that's exactly how they treat us. And they act like they own our vote. So let's talk about, Paul, we're going to transition to you. We talked about the problem. We talked about how Democratic policies are exacerbating the problem, and just really how they've gotten really comfortable. And let's talk about, if your district, your 10th district, we can talk about Democratic platforms, how they will even use platforms in civil organizations such as the NAACP to support their position. And then come to find out, you have the Fairfax NAACP. Most people are shocked that the executive board is non-Black. And they also don't allow, even though the membership may be majority Black, they don't even allow members to talk amongst themselves. So one, does that make that organization a legitimate voice of the Black community? I think most of us reasonably say, no, it doesn't. But all right, Paul, what are some solutions? What do you have to help to uplift the educational, social, and political status of the African-American community in the 10th district?
So the reason why the Black community, the reason why the 10th district has been a target for the NAACP and the race baiters, et cetera, is because in the 10th congressional district, Blacks are doing better than Blacks in most other parts of the country. If you look at Loudoun County School District, graduation rate differential is about 2%, a little less than 2%, 1.9%. If we look at Prince Williams County, which is a majority minority school district, they do not reflect the same kind of underperformance that we find in other majority minority communities. So I believe that the reason why this is being so critical to invade this district is this district and its successes stand out as an exception, saying we don't need race-based education to do improvements. What we need is academic rigor, and that when we have academic rigor, minorities tend to perform. And if you look at the school districts within the 10th congressional district, all of the districts have a differential graduation rate between Blacks and whites of less than 2.5%. And that stands in the face of the entire Democrat argument that we're victims. it shows that when we are in good schools, in safe communities, that we perform well. But we've been impacted by COVID and by other things because there's still this differential when it comes to families. I don't know if you've heard.
Paul, I would like to. Yeah. I'm sorry. You mentioned that blacks do well when they are in good communities and around safe schools, and so let's talk about specific to like Fairfax, because we talk about TJ admissions, where the entire focus of that admissions policy was we're only going to focus on the southeastern portion of the county, completely ignoring that most of the black community in Fairfax County is affluent. In fact, 60% are not low income. We are spread throughout the county. So why are you having TJ admissions that's focusing on, it's unfortunate to say only going for our cousins, and just, and saying, hey, even though we recognize, the school board recognizes that we have enough black and brown children in the advanced academic pipeline to fill an entire freshman class at TJ, why would you exclude them from admissions for the class of 2025? I just wanted to bring that up because I think that was a pertinent example.
Because I think that the Democrat agenda needs the ability to take credit for something. I went out and I tried to find studies where race-based education increased academic performance. And I couldn't find anything. Wherever they implement SEL, CRT, et cetera, and they try to say that this race-based education has had a positive result, you'll find that it always accompanies another program that is about academic rigor. And so they claim that the race-based pieces are what are increasing performance, when in fact, it is the rigor that is increasing performance. They need this district. They want to be able to point to this district, point to the African Americans in this community, and they want us to say that these race-based initiatives are what caused success among these blacks. Now, I went back through to 2008 and pulled out all the statistics statewide with regards to academic performance. I did a presentation to the Racial and Social Justice Commission of Prince William County, and I showed in the data that the progress of the black community predated the implementation of any of these race-based programs. In fact, if you look at the commission's report that came out, they mirrored my findings, and they said that they could find no bias in the system that was negatively affecting academic performance. So the numbers don't bear it out. However, if you can get these programs implemented in Fairfax, in Prince William, in Loudoun, then they can go back on the national stage and they can make the claim, see, it works. What they don't want to tell you is that academic rigor.
I want to just a quick interjection, Paul. So before we go back there, I know we're going to get back to Bernie in a second. Oh, sorry, I lost. So we're 10. And I wanted
to kind of fill the gap. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, in terms of Paul, why they're here, what they're looking to do, and why it's important that they put these programs in place here. Because there was one study by Stanford University in 2016 that actually talked about and tried to measure the effects of race-based education and their effects. And the outcome of the study is that they had no evidence that race-based education actually works, but the recommendation of the study was to keep trying to see if it works.
Okay, Paul. Before we go to transition back to Bernie here about. Yeah, can you hear me now? Testing 1, 2, 3. I can hear you. Can you?
Can't hear you yet, Harry.
Can't hear me. Okay, so I was trying to jump into the conversation. All right, there we go. Okay, so Paul, before we go back in, and I want to give Mr. Flowers time as well to talk about what's going on in Baltimore. But what you talked about with the Democratic issue on how race-based admissions or criteria, they think it's helping the black community. Let's be specific. Let's call out what's going on in Loudoun County. Academy of Science, Academy of Engineering, they said that they found evidence of a racial bias in admissions to those schools, those two elite institutions. They actually gave office space to the Loudoun County NAACP, which, again, I mentioned before, they're not representative of the black community. It's mostly the white woke community. But when they changed admissions policies, did the black enrollment increase? It did not. Who were the primary beneficiaries of not only admissions to Loudoun Academy of Science and Engineering, but also St. Thomas Jefferson High School? It was primarily the white community. And this is where they start adding in criteria for holistic evaluation, including extracurricular activities that benefit two-parent households, which we've seen from Democratic policies. Bernie had mentioned before, it really kicked the father out of the household. And now you have a situation where they're trying to say, we're trying to help you. And then we're basically setting up criteria where basically more white kids get into these elite institutions. All right, Bernie, how are you doing? I know that was a long time. Let's go. Let's talk about you. How you're running in your district, Baltimore. I mean, we've seen The Wire. I mean, we've got to save ourselves. I mean, let's talk about your approach. How's it going to uplift the educational, political, and social status of the African American community in the Baltimore 2nd District?
I got a different approach. And first of all, we've seen The Wire. It's pretty bad in Baltimore, but my district is Eastern Baltimore County, and also Northern Anne Arundel County, which is majority white, a lot of NSA people, a lot of military people, a lot of federal people there. Financially, they're doing very, very well. But the whole issue is this woke CRT thing it's like, to me, literally some sort of communist plot to weaken the Black community, make people think that we're being mistreated, turn everyone into victims, and just, waste a bunch of time. And again, my big issue is lack of education leads to crime. Crime leads to unhappiness in the community. And I'm just trying to make things happen in a positive way. Now, one thing that I don't know if you guys are aware of, you spoke of Patterson High School. Well, there's actually a gentleman by the name of Giovanni Patterson, who happens to be a good friend of mine. They have a federal lawsuit in place against the city of Baltimore and the city of Baltimore schools. This is unprecedented because what they're talking about is the idea that the outcome for Black kids, for African American students, is absolutely unacceptable, and nobody's looked at that. We've got a lot of statistics like what Paul has, but the bottom line is everyone can see that Baltimore is portions of Baltimore. People are living like they're in the third world. I was driving through there last week at 10 o'clock at night, just wandering through the district for coming back from a political meeting, and I'm seeing tents outside. It was 22 degrees, well, probably 25 degrees outside, 10 o'clock at night, and majority people were begging me for money. What have we done to our economy? What have we done to our school districts when we've got people out willing to beg for money at that time of night? And, it's just bad. It's just bad all the way around. I attribute it to the school board. They are not, doing a good job of taking care of the rank and file African American in Baltimore. And the kids are just basically running wild. And, as far as the statistics are concerned, again, when we've got kids graduating, 70% or 70% of the Black boys can't read, and we're continuing passing them through the pipeline, and then the school board is pushing all this CRT thing, making people feel that they're less than. It's not helping us at all. So, but again, Baltimore is not my whole district. I've got Northern Anne Arundel County, where Blacks are doing very, very well. Again, two-parent families, just like where you guys are in Loudoun County, people with federal jobs, and, the military-industrial complex, which is part of the problem. But, the bottom line is people are eating, people are educating their kids, they're sending them off to great schools, and that's fine. But we can't forget about the least of us. And that's what inspired me to do what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. It's a good point there that, I mentioned before down in Fairfax that you have members that the Black community is a diverse community. We have a lot of we very much so. We do have Black excellence as we have here on the show. But for some reason, you just seem to hyper focus on the left that they think that we need to have race-based education, and they only think of the impoverished portions of a community from policies that they create, that are there because of policies they created and are perpetuated by that. And when we think about like the value, when we talk about the elevation of your political, social, and educational status, think about like your asset. What's the greatest asset? What's the most valuable asset that most of us have? It is our home. And what brings the most value to our home? It is low crime, and it is the quality of our education. Mm-hmm. And if you are not providing quality education, or say if you even more nefarious, if you don't like Black people or don't like Hispanic people, what do? You provide them a poor education. And who's empowering these educational systems within these urban areas? It's not Republicans, and they haven't been for some time. So I mean that's something to consider for those of you that are watching this. I mean, if you're at the barbershop and you're tuning into this, you're watching this waiting for your haircut, you need to think about this when you are going to the polls and you're voting, to not think that you just have to be loyal. You need to really think about who is going to do what's best for your child. Who knows what's best for your child? Who's actually going to fight to promote your elevation in society? And I think that's something we need to think about.
If I may add into this, you and I were talking about this the other day, but the point is that they seem to have an agenda towards gender politics. And there's this book called Gender Queer that is in the local school systems here in Howard County, in Anne Arundel County, in Baltimore County, and it basically is pornographic. And
it goes one step further than that.
Yeah.
All right. So for those of you that are wondering, and this is, if you want to think how comfortable they've gotten with representing this. So you've been in Anne Arundel and Howard County. That book is in Fairfax County. It was in Loudoun County. They removed it. And I'll give you a quick description of it. You can see some of the books on Education Matters when we were local on novanow.tv. But that book has a description in the context of Plato's Symposium. Now, Plato's Symposium, if you're not familiar with that, that's when you had the Greeks that would have boys as sex slaves. And they would perform that as the highest form of love. And that's the same concept that the National Man-Boy Association, yes, the Pedophilia Association, also describes it, that have sex between men and boys is the highest form of love. Now, I mentioned before the Fairfax NAACP is majority white controlled. It is majority white controlled, and certainly non-Black, and the education space specifically. And the Fairfax NAACP actually put out a flyer earlier, a few months ago, saying that they support having genderqueer in our libraries being accessible to boys as early as 11 years old. And in that depiction, when I talk about Plato's Symposium, it has a depiction of a young boy fully erect being fondled by an adult male fully erect and enjoying it. Yes, that is how bad it is, and this is what has happened by the white woke community. And yes, they do live in the Democratic Party, and they have gone to that extreme. So when you vote for your congressman, when you're thinking about what is best for my baby, you really need to think about these issues, and to look at and to not vote just simply because we always vote Democrat. That ship has sailed. We are beyond that. They are not producing for us, and we need to do what's best for us.
All right. It's terrible. I don't support CRT. I don't support this gender stuff. It's just bad for society all the way around. But whatever's bad for the majority of the community is worse for Black people. We always get the short end of the stick when it comes to that sort of thing. And we've got to put a stop to it. And again, that's one of the reasons I'm a Republican. I'm a conservative. I don't agree with everything the Republican Party does, but I certainly agree with the Republican Party and the conservatives a lot more than I support genderqueer.
Yes. And this is important. This is important because, and your vote is important and your support is important, because you will see that if you observe, when you look at the Democratic Party, they try to assume that they have the support of the Black community to justify whatever they do and to win over white moderate votes. And we need to realize that they do not have our support. I mean, one is a wide community support, and they're not doing what's best for the Black community. All right, let's move on to final thoughts. Let's start with you, Mr. Lott.
I agree with everything that's been said here. I think in terms of things that we can do to help the Black community specifically, and this is particularly true even in Baltimore, I think that where we have underperforming students, I think that the school year should be expanded to cover 12 months and not just the 9 months. I think that it takes time to make up time, and we need to spend the time. When it comes to the school to prison pipeline, I believe that our children are suffering, or our adults are suffering, because of decisions that they made as children. It was a child who decided to drop out of school, not an adult. And so once they pass 18 or 19 years old, they're simply pushed out and left to society to where they end up in the criminal justice system. I think that when we look at education, we need to expand that, at least for the Black community, to where education is accessible through the 20s. And we need to have programs to address that, because the only way that we're going to stop people from going to jail is to give them literacy. I think that for those who are incarcerated, I think that in Virginia, only 40% of our prisons have education programs in place in the prisons. But we know from the numbers that if someone graduates with a high school diploma, gets a high school diploma while in prison, recidivism is cut in half. If they get a bachelor's degree while in prison, recidivism goes down to about 15%. If they get an even more advanced degree while in prison, the number statistically is that no one returns. I think it was 1 in like 10 years I could find. And so we have ways of dealing with these problems. It costs about $31,000 to incarcerate someone. It takes about $15,000 a year to educate them. I think that we need to put money towards education in prison, and that will start to break that pipeline, because the education is going to be the answer. It just can't be K-12. It has to be systemic as adults. We have to be able to have a system in place to allow our people to continue to learn beyond graduation and to be able to mitigate the failures of our public school system.
Wow. Excellent. Mr. Flowers.
Harry, you know how I feel, but for the audience, school choice is the answer, at least in Baltimore and at least for underperforming schools. There's an old saying that we used to say back in the military is iron sharpens iron. And the issue today is there is no competition. The school boards, the local school boards, the liberal-led local school boards are basically stifling competition. And if you look over at some of the private schools, the parochial schools, they're thriving. And they should be able to take that $18,000 per year that we, take from folks in tax dollars and apply those monies towards the schools of their choice. And I think that, as a matter of fact, I'm sure that we would get a better result from what we're doing now. So with that said, that is my biggest deal, school choice.
I agree. If you give somebody a coupon where they can get a free education, and I think that's bipartisan. I mean, look at how many Democrats are pro school choice, right? How many of them put their kids in private schools?
Yeah,
Terry McAuliffe, who's running for governor. Barack, he put his kids in. Sidwell. Same with Bill.
Not as I say. Do as I say.
Yeah, exactly. Not as I do. Right. Do as I say, not as I do. Gentlemen, thank you for your time. I know that you're very busy on the campaign trail. I wish you the best. I hope you win. I mean, I think our community would be better served by having you both in office. Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. You're great. Haven't changed a bit.
Thank you. All right. So as we wrap up here, just remember, folks, please subscribe to usanow.tv. Look into my show, Education Matters, with me, Dr. Harry Jackson. I'd like to thank our producer, Mr. Samataro. He's got a lot of other great opportunities, particularly dealing with cyberspace, privacy, and as well as other great programming out there. Again, thank you.